Always thought I was lucky. 2 years with a man who seemed perfect. Luke was attentive, caring, intelligent. He always talked about our future, painting a beautiful picture, a home, children, travels. I believed him completely. We met at my friend Emma's birthday party. He was a friend of her boyfriend and immediately caught my attention. Tall, confident, with that perfect sense of humor that draws you in from the first joke. Luke easily carried a conversation, and I felt like we had known each other forever. A week later, he asked me out, a cozy little cafe, long talks, genuine laughter, and deep eye contact. We grew close quickly. Luke seemed flawless in every way. He worked in finance, made good money, and had clear goals in life. I worked as a marketing specialist at a mid-sized agency. My salary wasn't as high, but it never seemed to matter. Luke always said we were a team, that it wasn't about who earned more but about being together. After a year of dating, we moved in together. It felt like the natural next step. We were already spending nearly all our time together. Luke suggested we rent something bigger than my one-bedroom apartment. He insisted on splitting expenses equally: rent, utilities, groceries. It seemed fair to me. He also started talking about saving for the future, for a house, a wedding, kids. "I'll open a joint account," he said one evening. "We'll put our savings there. I know how to invest wisely, I can manage it." I didn't hesitate. He knew finance better than I did, and we had shared goals. Every month, I transferred half of my savings to the account. Luke did the same. We accumulated over $50,000. Life moved forward. We made plans, discussed where we wanted to settle, even started looking at houses online. Luke loved talking about the future. It reassured me. But then small red flags started appearing. At first, he started coming home late from work. "Big project," he'd say. Then he became more secretive about money. "Trust me, I'm handling everything," he'd respond whenever I asked about our savings. I trusted him. But one evening when he left his laptop open, I saw an email from the bank. The account was empty. Every cent was gone. A chill ran through me. I started digging through papers, checking his browsing history, desperate for answers. And I found them: a plane ticket. One ticket. For tomorrow. To Mexico. I couldn't believe my eyes. My heart pounded, my hands trembled. I took screenshots of everything and waited for him to come home. Luke walked in after midnight. "We need to talk," I said, gripping my phone tightly. He looked at me, then at the screen. His face remained unreadable. "So, he said flatly. Something inside me shattered. "You stole our money?" I could barely breathe. "Our money," Luke smirked. "It was a joint account. I decided how to use it." "You're running away?" "I have other plans." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The man I trusted, the man I built a life with, was a fraud. This was all a lie? My voice shook. Luke shrugged. "Not all of it. But money matters more." I couldn't listen to him anymore. My heart was breaking. My legs felt weak. I rushed to the bedroom, grabbed my phone, and called the police. Luke stood in the doorway, watching me, making no attempt to stop me. "You're making a mistake," he said as he walked out of the apartment. By the time the police arrived, he was already gone. I don't know exactly when things started to change. It was so gradual that I didn't see the signs, or maybe I refused to. Luke was still there, still coming home every night, still eating dinner with me, still sleeping next to me. But something was off. He stopped talking about the future. The conversations that used to be filled with plans for houses, trips, and children slowly faded into silence. If I tried to bring up our savings or ask about what we should do next, he'd just shrug. "Let's not worry about that now," he'd say, barely looking up from his phone. At first, I told myself it was just stress. He'd been complaining about work more often, saying he had too many projects, that the higher-ups were pressuring him. I wanted to be understanding. I told myself that once things calmed down, he'd go back to the Luke I knew. But he didn't. He grew distant, cold. His kisses became brief, mechanical. He stopped saying "I love you," unless I said it first, and even then, it felt like an obligation. He started spending more nights out, always with some excuse. Dinner with a client. Late meeting. Just grabbing a drink with the guys. When I asked why he didn't text me when he was out so late, he'd roll his eyes. "Jesus, Sarah, do I need to check in with you every 5 minutes?" One night, around 2 in the morning, I woke up to find the bed empty. He hadn't come home. I called him, no answer. I texted, nothing. My stomach twisted with anxiety. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, telling myself he'd just had too much to drink and crashed at a friend's place. When he finally walked in at 6 a.m., he smelled like alcohol and perfume. A scent that wasn't mine. "Where the hell have you been?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Don't start," he muttered, kicking off his shoes. "Luke, I've been calling you all night. My phone died." He collapsed onto the bed, fully dressed, turning away from me. I don't need an interrogation. I wanted to believe him, but something inside me whispered that I shouldn't. Things didn't get better. Over the next few weeks, it felt like he wasn't even trying to pretend anymore. His patience for me was gone. When I asked if something was wrong, he'd get irritated. When I reached for his hand, he'd pull away. Then, one evening, everything exploded. I came home from work, expecting another tense, silent night. Instead, Luke was sitting at the kitchen table, waiting for me. His expression was blank. "We need to talk," he said. My heart pounded. Okay. I set my bag down, bracing myself. He exhaled sharply, like he was annoyed before the conversation even started. I'm done, he said. I don't want to do this anymore. For a second, I thought I misheard him. What? This? Us? I don't want to be with you anymore. I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. Luke, where is this coming from? We can talk about this. If you're unhappy, we can. No, he interrupted. I've already made up my mind. I'm moving on. And you need to move out. You have 5 days. 5 days. He wasn't even pretending to be sad about it. His voice was flat, his expression unreadable. Like I was some roommate he'd grown tired of, not the woman he'd spent the last 2 years telling he wanted to marry. Luke, please, can we just? I don't want to have a long, dramatic conversation about this, Sarah. He stood up. It's over. Just start packing. He walked away, just like that. No emotion. No regret. I felt like I was drowning. But the worst part? The worst part was that I still didn't know the full extent of the betrayal. Not yet. I didn't accept it. I couldn't. For 2 days, I tried to talk to him, to get him to explain, to tell me why he was throwing everything away. He refused. And then I found out the truth. It wasn't because of stress. It wasn't because of work. It was because of her. Ashley. I'd never met her, but I knew her name. She worked with Luke. I'd heard him mention her in passing. Just another colleague, or so I thought. But she wasn't just a colleague. She was the reason he'd stopped coming home. She was the reason he stopped touching me, stopped looking at me like I mattered. Because he had already replaced me. I found out when I logged into our shared streaming account and saw a new profile. Ash and Luke. My stomach dropped. I clicked on it, my hands trembling. The recently watched list was filled with movies I'd never seen, romantic comedies, the kind Luke always said he hated when I wanted to watch them. But the worst part? The vacation photos. I checked his email. He never logged out on his laptop. And there they were. Booking confirmations. Flights, hotels, restaurants. A luxury resort in the Maldives. Dated 2 months ago. While he was still coming home to me, sleeping in our bed, telling me everything was fine, he had already been on vacation with her. With Ashley. Spending our money. I saw the credit card charges. Expensive jewelry, designer clothes, lavish dinners. I felt sick. Luke hadn't just fallen out of love with me. He had been using me. He let me believe we were building a life together while he drained our savings to take another woman on a dream vacation. I confronted him that night. I was shaking, furious, heartbroken. How long? I demanded, shoving the receipts in his face. Luke didn't even flinch. Oh well, he admitted. A while. My voice cracked. You took her on vacation. With our money. He shrugged. I was going to leave you anyway. What's the difference? I had never wanted to hit someone so badly in my life. You're a monster, I whispered. His eyes were cold. I'm practical. That was the moment I realized. The man I loved never really existed. Luke was a liar, a cheater, a thief. And I had 5 days to pack up my life and leave. I was supposed to pack my things and leave quietly, just like Luke wanted. He thought I would cry, accept defeat, and disappear from his life without a fight, as if I had never mattered, as if the last 2 years were nothing more than a passing phase he could erase without consequence. But he underestimated me. He thought he had won, that he had played his game perfectly, that he had manipulated me into silence while he walked away unscathed, but he had no idea who he was dealing with. I wasn't going to let him get away with it, not after everything he had done, not after he had betrayed me so completely, not after he had stolen my money, my trust, and my future. He had made the mistake of assuming that I would break, that I would fall apart and let him walk away without facing the consequences. But he was wrong. I wasn't broken. I was furious. And I was going to make sure he paid for every single thing he had done. The first thing I did was gather everything I could use against him. I spent hours combing through old emails, bank statements, text messages, and receipts, screenshotting every piece of evidence that proved what he had done. I compiled the transactions from our joint savings account, highlighting every withdrawal he had made, every large sum he had spent, every luxury item he had purchased while telling me that we were saving for a future together. I found the airline tickets for his trip with Ashley, the hotel booking confirmation in the Maldives, the expensive dinners, the jewelry, the shopping sprees, all paid for with money that was supposed to belong to both of us, money that I had trusted him to manage, money that he had used to fund his affair. The more I uncovered, the angrier I became, and the more determined I was to make sure everyone knew exactly who he was. Luke had built his entire life on an illusion. He had crafted an image of himself as a successful, ambitious, trustworthy man, someone people respected, someone people looked up to, someone people admired. He had surrounded himself with colleagues, friends, and acquaintances who saw him as charming, intelligent, and dependable, but it was all a carefully constructed lie. His reputation was everything to him, and I knew that the best way to hurt him wasn't just to expose his infidelity but to destroy the very foundation of the life he had built. He cared about how people saw him, about the admiration he received, about the respect he commanded, and I was going to take all of that away from him. The first step was Ashley. She was just as much a victim as I was, even if she didn't know it yet. She thought she had won, thought she was the one Luke had chosen, thought she was special, but she had no idea that he had been lying to her just as much as he had been lying to me. I didn't know if she would believe me, but I wasn't going to give her a choice. I found her Instagram easily, scrolling through the carefully curated photos of her and Luke, the fake smiles, the picturesque sunsets, the moments of happiness that had been built on stolen money and deceit. I sent her a direct message, keeping it short and to the point, knowing that she would likely ignore anything too dramatic. I told her that I had undeniable proof that Luke had been lying to her, that he had stolen from me, that he had cheated on both of us, and that if she wanted to see the truth for herself, all she had to do was look at the documents I was about to send. As expected, she ignored me. She probably thought I was just another bitter ex trying to cause problems, another woman scorned, another desperate attempt to break them up, but I had anticipated that. So I took it one step further. I printed out every piece of evidence, every bank statement, every receipt, every flight confirmation, and I went to her office. I waited outside the building until I saw her leaving for lunch, and then I walked right up to her and placed the folder in her hands before she could brush me off. She looked annoyed, irritated that I had the audacity to approach her, but when I told her that Luke had used our joint savings account to pay for their luxury vacation, that the money he had spent on her had been stolen from me, that while he was telling her she was the only one, he had still been coming home to me, she finally stopped pretending she didn't care. She scoffed at first, rolling her eyes, trying to dismiss me the way Luke must have taught her to, but then she opened the folder and started flipping through the pages, and I saw the exact moment her confidence cracked. I watched her expression shift from annoyance to confusion to disbelief to pure, unfiltered rage as she read through the evidence, her hands shaking as she pieced together the truth. She called the hotel in the Maldives, just to prove me wrong, just to reassure herself that it was all some elaborate lie, but when they confirmed the payment details, when they told her exactly whose card had been used, I saw the last bit of denial drain from her face. She looked at me, her lips parted slightly, her eyes wide with the realization that she had been nothing more than a pawn in Luke's game, just like I had been. She whispered something under her breath, a curse, a disbelieving mutter of frustration, and then she exhaled sharply before saying the only words that mattered in that moment. "I'm going to ruin him." And she did. Ashley didn't just break up with Luke. She tore his entire life apart. She had connections, people who mattered, people who had the power to make his life miserable, and she used every single one of them. Within a week, Luke was fired from his job, not just because of the scandal but because she uncovered even more dirt on him. False expense reports, fabricated invoices, manipulated financial records that proved he had been stealing from the company just like he had stolen from me. His boss didn't just fire him. He made sure Luke would never work in the industry again. His name was blacklisted from every major firm in the city, his carefully built career reduced to nothing in a matter of days. But it didn't stop there. His friends, the ones who had always defended him, the ones who had believed he was a good guy, started distancing themselves as the truth spread. They saw the receipts, the screenshots, the undeniable proof that he had spent years lying, cheating, manipulating, and they wanted nothing to do with him. The respect he had always craved, the admiration he had relied on, the social circle he had built, all of it crumbled around him. His reputation was destroyed. His job was gone. His friends abandoned him. And Ashley, the woman he had chosen over me, the woman he had risked everything for, the woman he had thought would stay by his side, walked away without looking back. Luke showed up at my apartment a few weeks later, looking nothing like the man I had once loved. He was disheveled, exhausted, desperate. He stood at my door with a look of barely concealed anger and tried to blame me for everything, tried to convince me that I had gone too far, that I had overreacted, that I had ruined his life. But I just stared at him with nothing but satisfaction in my eyes. He had taken everything from me, and now he had nothing left. I let him stand there, let him try to manipulate me one last time, let him beg for a chance he didn't deserve, and then I smiled, stepped back and slammed the door in his face. That was the last time I ever saw Luke, and I never looked back. Moving out of Luke's apartment should have felt like an ending, but instead, it felt like a beginning. The moment I stepped into my new place, a 1,500 square foot modern apartment in a high-rise building downtown, I felt a strange combination of fear and freedom. It was expensive, $2,500 a month, but I had run the numbers over and over again, and I knew I could afford it now. After everything I had been through, I needed a place that was mine, somewhere Luke had never set foot in, somewhere I could start over without his shadow looming over me. The first night, I stood in the middle of my empty living room, surrounded by unopened boxes, and took a deep breath. For the first time in years, I was alone. Not in a painful way, not in the way that made my chest tighten and my stomach twist, but in a way that made me feel alive. The next few weeks were a blur of unpacking, adjusting, and trying to rediscover who I was outside of Luke. My work became my anchor. Maybe it was the rage that still simmered inside me. Maybe it was the desperate need to prove to myself that I was more than just a woman scammed by a man who never loved her. But whatever it was, I threw myself into my job like never before. My boss, Megan, a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her mid-40s, noticed. "You're a different person lately," she said one afternoon, tapping her manicured nails against her desk as she studied me. In a good way. More focused. More aggressive. I wasn't sure if aggressive was a compliment, but I didn't care. I had spent too long being passive, too long letting someone else control my life, my future, my finances. I wasn't going to let that happen again. 2 months after I moved into my new apartment, Megan called me into her office with a rare smile on her face. "You've earned this," she said, sliding a folder across her desk. "Congratulations, Sarah. You're being promoted to senior marketing strategist. I stared at the folder, my hands shaking slightly as I picked it up. The new title. The salary increase. The recognition. It felt real. It felt like I had climbed out of the wreckage of my past life and was finally standing on solid ground. That night, I celebrated. I called Emma, the friend who had introduced me to Luke years ago, the friend I had slowly lost touch with as Luke had tightened his grip on my life. She was the kind of person who radiated warmth, the kind of friend who didn't hold grudges, the kind of person I had missed desperately without even realizing it. About time, she said when I told her about my promotion over drinks at a rooftop bar. You've been killing it at work for years. They should have promoted you ages ago. I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in months. Maybe I wasn't ready before. Maybe, she agreed, then leaned in, her expression turning serious. But you're ready now. And I'm so proud of you. It wasn't just my career and friendships that I was rebuilding. I had always loved art, painting, sketching, anything that let me create something out of nothing. But somewhere along the way, I had let that part of me fade. Luke had never outright discouraged it, but he had never supported it either. He had made little comments, harmless on the surface but corrosive underneath, things like, "That's cute, but do you really have time for that? Or you're so busy with work, maybe focus on something more productive." I hadn't even realized how much I had let his words shape my choices until one day, while wandering through a local art supply store, I felt an inexplicable urge to buy a set of acrylic paints and a canvas. I brought them home, set them up in the corner of my apartment, and just started. The first few attempts were terrible, messy, and uncoordinated, but I didn't care. I wasn't painting for anyone else. I wasn't trying to be perfect. I was just letting myself feel, letting the anger, the heartbreak, the relief, the hope spill onto the canvas in bold, chaotic strokes. One evening, Emma came over and spotted the half-finished paintings leaning against the walls. "These are amazing," she said, picking one up and studying it. I scoffed. "They're just..." "Don't you dare say they're nothing," she cut me off. "These are raw and beautiful, and you should be proud of them." For the first time, I actually looked at them, really looked at them, and I felt something shift inside me. Maybe she was right. Maybe I had created something worth being proud of. Meanwhile, Ashley had undergone a transformation of her own. After breaking up with Luke, she had thrown herself into her career with the same intensity one had, but unlike me, she was already on an upward trajectory. She worked in corporate finance, a male-dominated field where she had spent years proving herself, and now, with Luke out of the picture, she was unstoppable. One night, we met for dinner, something that still felt strange but had slowly become normal. Our relationship had started in the ruins of something ugly, but over time, we had formed an unexpected friendship. "I got promoted," she said, sipping her wine with a smirk. "Senior financial consultant." "That's amazing," I said, genuinely happy for her. "You deserve it." "Damn right I do." She laughed, then set her glass down, her expression softening. "And you know what else? I'm seeing someone." I raised an eyebrow. "Really?" She nodded. "His name is Daniel. We met at a networking event a few months ago. He's different." "Different how?" She hesitated, then smiled in a way I had never seen before. "He's kind. He actually listens. He doesn't play games." I thought about how Luke had made us both feel small, like we were pieces in a game he was always one step ahead of, and I understood what she meant. "That's good," I said. "You deserve that too." As I walked back to my apartment that night, I thought about how much had changed in such a short time. I had been so afraid that Luke had taken something from me that I would never get back, but now I realized that wasn't true. I had a new apartment, a new job, a new passion, and the beginnings of a life that was mine and mine alone. I had friendships that were stronger than ever, a career that was finally taking off, and a version of myself that no longer felt like a shadow of the woman I used to be. Luke had tried to break me, but I had rebuilt myself. And this time, no one was going to take that away from me. When Luke lost his job, I heard about it almost immediately. It spread through our mutual circles like wildfire, how he had been fired for financial misconduct, how he had been blacklisted from every major company in his industry, how his once promising career had crumbled into nothing. At first, I thought I would feel some kind of satisfaction, some triumphant sense of justice, but when I heard the details, how he had begged his boss for another chance, how he had tried to shift the blame onto others, how he had walked out of that office with nothing but a box of his belongings, I felt nothing. No anger. No pity. Just a cold, indifferent detachment that told me I was finally free. His downfall didn't stop there. One by one, his friends began to distance themselves. Luke had always surrounded himself with people who admired him, people who saw him as charming, successful, someone worth knowing. But now that the truth was out, that he was a liar, a cheater, a thief, they started pulling away. No one wanted to be associated with him anymore. The invitations stopped. The calls went unanswered. Even his closest friends, the ones who had defended him in the past, the ones who had believed his version of events, finally saw him for what he was. And then, just when I thought I would never have to deal with him again, Luke tried to come back into my life. It started with a text. "Luke, Sarah, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but please, just give me a chance to explain." I stared at the message for a long time, debating whether I should block him or let him drown in the silence. Then came another text. "Luke, I lost everything. I know I messed up, but I need to talk to you. Please." And another. "Luke, Can we just meet? One conversation. That's all I'm asking. Then he showed up. It was late one evening when I heard a knock at my door. For a brief moment, a flicker of unease ran through me. But when I looked through the peephole and saw Luke standing there, disheveled and desperate, I felt nothing but exhaustion. I didn't open the door. I just stood there, watching as he shifted his weight from foot to foot, running a hand through his unkempt hair. His expensive suit was gone, replaced with jeans and a wrinkled shirt. He looked smaller somehow, like the weight of his own failures had finally begun to crush him. "Sarah, please," he called through the door. "Just let me talk." I leaned against the wall, closing my eyes, listening to the sound of his voice. A year ago, I would have crumbled at the sound of that desperation. I would have opened the door. I would have let him back in. Now, I didn't owe him anything. After a minute of silence, he sighed heavily and pressed his forehead against the door. "I know you hate me. I get it. But I need you to understand. I never meant for things to go this way. I was stupid. I made mistakes. But you and I walked away before he could finish. I didn't need to hear whatever pathetic excuse he was about to make. I went to my bedroom, turned on some music, and let the sound drown out the past. By the time I checked the peephole again, he was gone. That was the moment I knew it was truly over. Erasing him. The next morning, I decided to erase every trace of Luke from my life. I went through my phone, deleting every old message, every photo, every call log that still carried his name. I scrolled through my social media, removing every post, every memory, every comment he had ever left. I found the few physical things he had left behind. An old hoodie, a book he had lent me, a necklace he had once given me, and threw them in the trash without a second thought. Then, I did something I had never planned to do. I told my story. It started as a long post on social media, one that I hesitated to publish at first. But as I wrote, the words poured out of me, raw and unfiltered. I didn't hold anything back. I wrote about the betrayal, the stolen money, the lies, the manipulation, the way he had broken me down piece by piece until I no longer recognized myself. I wrote about how I had found strength in the wreckage, how I had rebuilt my life, how I had refused to let him win. I expected people to judge me. I expected them to call me naive, foolish, weak for trusting him in the first place. Instead, the support flooded in. Comments, messages, calls from old friends. Even strangers reached out, sharing their own stories, telling me how much they related, how much they admired my strength, how they wished they had spoken up sooner about the people who had wronged them. For the first time, I didn't feel ashamed of what had happened. For the first time, I felt free. The trip. A week later, I booked a flight to Europe. It wasn't something I had planned, but the idea struck me suddenly, and once it did, I couldn't let it go. I had spent so much time living in Luke's shadow, letting his decisions dictate my life, that I had forgotten what it felt like to choose something just for myself. I started with Paris. The moment I stepped off the plane and breathed in the crisp air of a new city, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. No one here knew me. No one knew my past, my mistakes, my heartbreak. I was just another traveler, another person exploring the world, another woman who had walked through fire and come out the other side. From Paris, I went to Rome, then to Santorini, then to Amsterdam. Each city felt like another layer of my old life peeling away, revealing something new underneath. I wandered through art galleries, sat in quiet cafes with a sketchbook, watched the sun set over foreign skylines, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. One evening, while sitting on a balcony overlooking the canals of Venice, I opened my phone and saw an unread message from an unknown number. I knew who it was before I even opened it. "Luke, I hope you're happy." I stared at the message for a long time. Then, without a second thought, I deleted it. Yes, I was happy. For the first time in my life, I was truly happy. And Luke? Luke was nothing more than a story I had already finished reading.